Welcome to the Robcast. This is a show about Oakville, the people that live, work, and do business here. We're honored to have our guests here. This is Anita Anand, who is the Member of Parliament for Oakville. She's also the Minister of Transport and the President of the Treasury Board. You're not going to want to miss this.
It's the Robcast Podcast. He's with you for the next hour or 20 minutes. Who knows? Let's see how it goes.
The Robcast is brought to you by Oakville's own Fisher Private Wealth Management of RBC Dominion Securities and Angus Fraser Private Banker with RBC Private Banking Oakville. And Agency One, Oakville's marketing powerhouse. Take your business to the next level with ease.
Here he is. It's Rob Raham.
Anita, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
Well, I want to kind of start with back to your kind of what was like growing up in a smaller town in Oakville. Tell me what your story of your childhood here.
My parents immigrated to Kentville, Nova Scotia, a town of 5,000 people in the mid-1960s.
Wow.
They met in Ireland, got married in England, and lived in India and Nigeria, and then in the 1960s decided to immigrate to Canada.
And landed
in Nova Scotia, and it was a beautiful fall weekend. It was Labor Day weekend.
Yep.
And they decided to stay there. And my younger sister and I were born there. My older sister came with my parents from Nigeria. And we spent 18 years there together.
Yeah.
And it was
what was the population there when you were growing up?
5,000.
5,000 people.
It's still 5,000.
Okay, good.
And I'll just say that growing up in a small rural town gave me an appreciation for so much.
Okay. Sounds like a heavy-weighted statement, but yes.
About the closeness of community, the importance of community, and it is really one of the reasons why my husband and I chose to settle here in Oakville with our 4 children. And that is because Oakville has that community feel. Oakville is a very tight-knit and loving place, and I'm just so grateful to be the Member of Parliament here.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle and I both being born and raised here can certainly attest to that. It's a very special town here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about your education and kind of your post-secondary education. Take me through that, because it was almost a decade of it, wasn't it?
Well, I moved to Queens, Kingston, Ontario from Nova Scotia when I was 18 and spent 4 years there and did my Bachelor of Arts Honours. And then I went to do my first law degree at Oxford in England, and that was a Bachelor of Arts in Jurisprudence. And then I moved to Nova Scotia, back to Nova Scotia, and at that time, you could do a Canadian law degree in 1 year. So I was at Dalhousie for 1 year doing that. And then I started to article and got called to the bar in Ontario. And then I went back to the University of Toronto to do my master's degree in law.
Was there a calling as you're kind of growing up through high school that you obviously wanted to go down this direction of law? Was there something that led you to that specifically, or sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's yourself?
Parents,
yes.
For me, they were really adamant that I did something to
medical school, law,
and serving the community was really important. And my mom actually did ask me many times if I wanted to be a Member of Parliament, if I wanted to try
really?
that.
Even back then? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even when I was really little. And
was there something she saw in you? Was it just your...
Well, she actually took us to see Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau back in the 1970s. And he said to this Indian woman with a sari on, he said namaste to her. And she had just become a Canadian citizen.
Wow.
And she saw that from the Prime Minister of the country. And then she turned to us and said, your country needs you. You must serve your country. And that was kind of the thread throughout our whole upbringing. And I just always bristled at that idea, because I didn't see public life as the right direction for me. Given that it's so public.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, you've got these degrees now. Where did you kind of professionally, what direction did you take it into kind of your professional career?
So I'm a big family girl. Like, I love my family, being with my family, and at the end of the day, putting on my sweats and hanging out with my family.
Yeah.
We have 4 children, twins in the middle, and we had 4 children under the age of 5 at one time. So we're a very close-knit family. And I really wanted a career first and foremost that put family first, and that's why I thought moving from the practice of law to teaching law would give me more flexibility.
Right.
And I did that for over 20 years before deciding to run for office. But by that time, my mom had passed away, so she never saw that I did what she ultimately advised me to do.
So you're, teaching law. I believe it was U of T was your last position.
Yes.
What changed that, or maybe you had planned all along that you were going to go into politics? What was the final kind of push for you that now is the time?
So I never planned to go into politics. Remember, I was saying to my mom, I don't think it's the life for me.
Right. And
Because
you've got
it
this
is
family,
so public.
young family.
And I'm super committed to my family. But I was asked to run a few times at the beginning of 2019. There was an election coming up in the fall, and I didn't say yes. I really thought that if I ran anywhere, it would have to be Oakville. They had asked me to run in different ridings around the GTA.
Who's they? Who's asking?
The Liberal Party.
The Liberal Party, okay.
And I really didn't see myself running in another place. And Oakville was already a seat held by John Oliver, and he had said he was going to run again. Mm-hmm. And so then suddenly John Oliver decided that he wasn't going to run. And all the people in my family who were saying, no, don't just occupy any seat, were now suddenly advocating for me
Now's the
to
time.
jump in.
Yeah.
And I'll say that's when I started seriously thinking about it, because I love Oakville so much, because I believe in that higher calling of public service, because I believe that our democracy is powerful and we need to test. Could I get elected? Many people told me that a racialized woman would never get elected in Oakville, Ontario. And I'm really glad that I ultimately decided to run and to try to see if that was true.
And how does that work? Do you hold your position still at U of T and you're kind of doing both, and now you're campaigning? Because the elections, I believe, are in the fall, right? So you're in the start of a school year. How did you manage that whole process?
So we can have a very straightforward conversation about it now, and I'll tell you the answer. But at the time, you're right. It was very difficult. I was in a job that I had been in for over a decade, and I loved that job. I loved teaching. I loved being an academic. And so it was very difficult, as your question suggests, for me to simply say, I'm not going to do this anymore, potentially. But I did ultimately seek a leave from the University of Toronto, so I'm on a leave of absence now.
Right.
And they granted me the leave that would be effective if I got elected.
Yeah.
And I did obviously get elected on October 21st, 2019, and then kept going.
Yeah. Now, this is a time of, I won't say turmoil, but, Oakville's divided, the states is divided. You ran your campaign. Do you remember some of the things, like or some of the challenges that came with your original campaign, or some of the successes, obviously, that came with
most definitely. I have so many stories I could tell you. But the overarching message I have in my campaigns and the way I am as a member of parliament is that we have to be positive and not denigrate others for simply holding a different viewpoint. I truly believe that we need to engage in rational discussion and debate, and while our ideas may differ from one another across the political spectrum, that we should not be personally attacking anyone, because putting your hat in the ring for public service is an incredibly difficult thing, and it's an important thing for our democracy. And so I'll say that, for example, with my colleague, Member of Provincial Parliament, Stephen Crawford, we have a very good relationship, and I'm very pleased that we're able to have these rational discussions about policy. And I'll keep trying to engage with members of parliament from all sides of the political spectrum. That's really what I am about as a member of parliament.
With you winning the election in 2019, as a Hindu woman, it was a pretty special thing, and you are the first, if you want to explain to the people out there, that the accolade that came with that.
So you're right. I was the first Hindu woman to be elected to be a member of parliament in the House of Commons of our country, and then the first Hindu woman to be named and appointed a cabinet minister. But I want to say that when I'm serving constituents, it is as the member of parliament, not as the Hindu member of parliament. And so I'm serving many communities, many religions, many minority groups, and every citizen of Oakville. And so I take that role very, very seriously. And I often tell my staff in my office on Robinson Street that we are a nonpartisan office. We serve everyone, because that is what it means to be a member of parliament. We are not a partisan office, and we will continue to execute and deliver and try our best to help everyone.
Now, you were appointed, and you've had a couple different roles, and I don't know how else to say it, but you were definitely thrown into the deep end of things. Like, explain the journey of your appointments as you kind of went through.
There is some humor when you look back at it in retrospect, so I understand why you're laughing.
Yeah, but it wasn't funny at the time, certainly
when
not.
the Prime Minister asked me to be the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, I did not know what that was, and as soon as I left the meeting, I went to look it up, and I saw Receiver General for Canada and the government's contracting agent and in charge of the National Shipbuilding Strategy and Canada Post. But nowhere on that list was COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
And so then after procuring the vaccines and the rapid tests and the PPE for the country, we became the most vaccinated country in the world in July 2021. I was then appointed to be the Minister of National Defence. And primarily, I think, to address sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Right.
Where I decided within days of being appointed that we would be moving the sexual misconduct cases under the criminal code to the civilian justice system from the military justice system. And then Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. And we were now purchasing aid for Ukraine, and I was leading that provision of military aid to Ukraine during the first part of that war.
I was going to ask, like, when you're reappointed, I guess is the way of saying it, are there conversations had with you? Like, Anita, we need you in this position? Or is it just they shuffle it up and...
It depends. Okay. And a lot of it ultimately rests with the Prime Minister. It is his appointment. He decides, and he knows that I am happy to serve, grateful to serve, honored to serve.
Yeah.
So I will always do whatever I can for our country and our town. I'll say that in the most recent appointment, which was Minister of Transport, the Prime Minister asked me to come and see him. And when I went in to see him, that's what he started with. You've always told me that I can count on you, and I need your assistance in filling the Minister of Transport role. And so he knew that I would do it without question. And so I'm doing that in addition to being the president of the Treasury Board right now.
And Oakville's
MP, and my mom, being a mom to my kids.
How do you manage it all? How do you manage the spectrum of it? How often are you called to Ottawa?
Well, I'm in Ottawa every week.
Okay.
So that is difficult, not being here in Oakville, and I love Oakville so much. So I really hope and look forward to every time I can come back here, as I am here today. The balancing act that is involved in my life, I think, is replicated over and over again in many, many people's lives. Certainly many moms and many working moms, working parents. So I don't think that I'm doing anything over and above what others are doing in our community. Not at all. I see incredible people in our community. They're volunteers. They're running small businesses. They're raising families. They're making sure they're serving on the school board or their school trustees. I see so much multitasking and giving back in our community. I'm sure you do too, Rob, that I'm inspired by our community. And certainly that's one of the reasons I love being here.
So, Anita, you've made it clear that you will be running again as the Oakville MP. And so, we've had other MPs and people in political positions here. And, there's always this challenge that comes with being as a public figure. And I'm curious that the challenges that you face on this, that you've had to go through as being in your position.
Certainly, our politics in this country right now is at a level of toxicity that I have never seen before. We have members of parliament, including our friend and colleague Pam Demoff, who has decided not to run at all.
Yep.
And I'll say that I too have experienced a number of very difficult, uncomfortable situations where in public people are yelling at me when I'm with my children. And I will say that is a difficult part of politics. The online harassment and violence and negativity is also difficult. I've had numerous death threats which require security responses. And I'll say that too gives me pause as to whether I do want to continue in this role. But at the end of the day, I believe that we need to fight for the values that hold communities together. And one of those values is that we leave no one behind, that we help the most vulnerable in our community survive. And through programs like the Canada Dental Benefit, which has helped about 10,000 people from Oakville, or the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted 600,000 kids out of poverty. Those are pillars of the policy of our government, which ensure that we're helping those people in need. And those are the reasons why I think it's so important to serve.
It seems like those outweigh the challenges that come with the job, those positive impacts, is what you're saying.
Well, you're right. That's a really good way to put it, that there are opportunities to make a difference, a positive difference in people's lives. And I've been able to do that as a member of parliament, fighting for Oakville, as well as being a minister, ensuring that our country had vaccines during the pandemic, ensuring that we were addressing sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces, overseeing $450 billion of federal expenditures in the Treasury Board, and now in transport, overseeing the file for high-speed and high-frequency rail, which is going to be something that Canadians as a whole can really benefit from.
Let me ask you, I'm going to ask this two-part question. The first one is there a day in your professional career in Ottawa that you remember specifically being the hardest day?
I was actually in Oakville on my hardest day, and that was during the pandemic, and it was January 14th, 2021. And on that day, I was on the phone with Pfizer, and Pfizer told me that they were going to be temporarily shutting down their facility in Perth, Belgium. That's where we were pulling our vaccines from,
right,
in order to retool it so that they could produce more faster. But what that meant is that we were going to see a slowdown temporarily in our vaccines. We ended up being the most vaccinated country in the world in July 2021. We ended up Q1 of 2021 with 3 million more vaccines than we had originally thought. But that one day was very difficult, and the following few weeks as well, because it was on my shoulders by and large to ensure that we had the vaccines for the country. And I had to tell Canadians that this was the situation. And that was right here in Oakville that I had those calls. And experience those difficult times.
Let me switch it then to is there a day that you thought, I've really made a difference and all that I have to go through for these positions is worth it? Is there one day that really stands out of something you accomplished in your roles?
Well, there's so much that I can say about the positive side of things. From a ministerial position, certainly announcing in July 2021 in Milton, actually, that we had enough vaccines to ensure that every eligible Canadian could have 2 shots. That was a pretty special day.
Yeah, especially after what you incurred earlier that year.
Right.
Yeah.
And then on the local level, connecting with people I never would have met had I not run for office, like you, Rob.
Yep.
But many small business owners, the volunteers who make charities run in this incredible community, the folks who need help, and I'm able to deliver help, that is incredibly meaningful to me, and it is a reason to keep going.
So Anita, we like to connect to our audience out there and ask questions. We had Chief Stephen Tanner on yesterday on the show, and one of the biggest concerns for the residents of Oakville is kind of the rise in crime, but more specifically auto theft. Mm-hmm. And he had some great points of what other things are happening now. What are you doing about this situation?
Well, first of all, our government, recognizing there is an issue, convened the National Auto Summit earlier this year and indicated that all parties would need to collaborate to address this problem. And we have now seen a 19% decrease in auto theft across the country. But there's more work to do, such as at the ports, such as scanning containers. And so what we are doing is purchasing scanners to go over and above what is currently being done so that we can be scanning containers at the ports. We're also investing in more personnel and equipment at the ports to ensure that the resources are there right at the point of contact.
Right.
We've also increased the penalties in the Criminal Code of Canada to 14 years for these types of incidents. And we've also introduced bail reform. Now, there is some talk about bail in this discussion, and I wanted to say that the province does have a role in terms of the appointment of judges who are the ones who grant bail. We need to ensure that there's space at prisons and detention centers, also within provincial responsibility.
This is one of the things the Chief spoke of, is the lack of space right now, right? And the backup.
So that when judges are seeing these cases, they're not throwing them out because there's no room at the jails.
Right.
But again, that's in the provincial realm of responsibility. In terms of the federal realm, we've got to continue to address the scanning of containers at the ports, the collaboration with the manufacturers and insurers to ensure that they are doing what they can to prevent theft before it occurs from a manufacturing standpoint, as well as, of course, we have the jurisdiction over the criminal code.
Right.
So again, auto theft is down 19% across the country. We have more work to do here in Halton.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that we need all parties to come to the table to act within their realm of responsibility. In the municipality situation, their responsibility is for streetlights and that type of thing. And so we all have a role to play.
Yeah. I think continuing on that theme, raising your family in Oakville and how much Oakville means to you and being our MP, what other things are you focusing on, right, for the people of Oakville with all the other things you have to manage in your career right now? So
housing has been an issue, and so we have put down over $70 million for additional housing on Kerr Street and then on Bronte Road north of the QEW for more affordable housing. Yeah. And we are also, as I said, ensuring that those benefits are in place. There are 3 benefits that I want to focus on.
Sure.
The first is the Canada Dental Benefit. And because of this federal support, we have seen 10,000 people in Oakville covered under the Canada Dental Plan. Then we should look at the Canada Child Benefit. Overall, nationally, we've seen 600,000 children lifted out of poverty. What does that mean for Oakville? 29,000 children have benefited from the Canada Child Benefit, and that's $100 million delivered for Oakville families. And then the Canada Carbon Rebate has ensured that $70 million are delivered back to Oakville residents. So you can see in those three examples, that's what we are delivering for Oakville. And certainly when we are knocking on doors, we do hear that Oakville residents are benefiting and appreciate that support.
Yeah. It's amazing to hear, like 29,000 children in Oakville. I mean, there's obviously a perception that Oakville, higher income per capita, success and all this, but there's an underlying problem that a lot of people kind of sweep under the rug or don't pay the attention to, but it's clear this is important.
I'm really glad you raised that point, because if you go to Kerr Street Mission or the Oakville YMCA or Halton Women's Place, these are just examples.
Well, we work for the Food for Kids, and I'm packing lunches.
Okay.
That was a game changer to see how many lunches are required in the schools.
Food for Life is another example of an organization doing excellent work. You can see that there are needs in Oakville, and we cannot forget the people in need, as you clearly don't, Rob.
Moving forward, if you, from your position and looking and speaking to the people of not just Oakville but of Canada, like what do you see being one of the more important issues in the next year to come?
Without question, it's affordability. Our inflation has decreased to about 1.6% in September, and the Bank of Canada has cut interest rates now 3 times, unlike most other G7 countries. But on the other hand, life is still difficult for Canadians, especially at the grocery store. And we need to make sure that we're understanding Canadians where they are, and that we're continuing to deliver for them. And this includes in Oakville, ensuring that we'll always be here for Oakville.
So I think this brings us to a part of the show we call the Robcast Rapid Ask. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. You're obviously not prepared for these, which is great. You're on death row. It's your last meal. You're by yourself. What is on that plate of food?
Chicken pot pie.
Nice.
Because I didn't grow up with chicken pot pie. I grew up, my parents made delicious food, tended to be Indian food, and I loved it. But I just started eating chicken pot pie in the most recent part of my life, and I love it.
It's quite comforting, isn't it?
Especially my mother-in-law's. But again, I love all kinds of food, and I love eating, especially in Oakville restaurants. And so I will always gravitate to a good meal, wherever it is. Now, if you wanted me to pick a treat, I would have a chocolate bar, and I'll take almost any kind of chocolate bar. I love chocolate.
Let me ask you this. If there's one person dead or alive that you could have the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with and pick their brain, who would that person be?
I want to see my mom again.
Okay.
And I'd have a great chat with her.
Yeah. Then let me ask, what would be something that most people don't know about you?
I like to think I'm funny. And in my job, because it's so serious.
That's a tricky one if they don't know that about you, though, right?
Exactly. And they may not think I'm funny, right?
But you think you're funny.
I like to try to be funny.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And silly around my kids,
Good.
especially. They don't really laugh with me. They laugh at me.
Sure.
But my job is so serious.
It's very serious.
Okay.
And you can't be silly at your job.
And certainly when I'm on TV in Ottawa doing the important work of the country or the riding, I am not joking around, but there's a part of me that thinks that the only way to survive sometimes is you've got to be able to smile and chuckle.
That's a good note. Last question. What's your favorite thing about Oakville?
The parks and the trees and the waterfront, and especially at this time of year, it is just so beautiful here in Oakville. I love it with all my heart, and especially walking through the trails. I'm just marveling always at the beauty of this town.
Well, Anita, we really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today. And please stay tuned for another episode of the Robcast.
The Robcast is brought to you by Oakville's own Fisher Private Wealth Management of RBC Dominion Securities and Fraser Associates of RBC Private Banking. And Agency One, Oakville's marketing powerhouse. Take your business to the next level with ease.